Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into another deep dive. This time, we're going to be exploring the Joseph story,
Yeah.
specifically Genesis chapters 41 through 43. And let me tell you, this is where things get really
It's
interesting.
really a pivotal point in the story.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers.
Right.
And he ends up becoming like the most powerful dude in Egypt.
Second only to Pharaoh himself. It's remarkable.
And it just goes to show, like, how God can work through any situation,
Right.
even something as awful as being betrayed by your own family.
Absolutely.
So to help us unpack all this, we've got a couple of really cool sources.
Yeah.
We're going to be using this academic Bible study guide, which is always super helpful. But we're also going to be looking at this epigraph written by an actual Egyptian pharaoh
Wow.
from the 3rd dynasty. Like, how cool is that?
That's amazing. It really helps us understand the context of the story.
Right. It's like a window into what life was really like back then.
Exactly.
So let's set the scene. We're in Egypt, and things are not looking good.
No, not at all.
The Nile River, which is like their lifeline,
Their lifeblood, yeah.
hasn't flooded for 7 years,
7 years. That's a long time.
which means no crops, which means famine. People are desperate. I mean,
Desperate times.
the Pharaoh even describes like people stealing to survive.
The temples are empty. People have lost hope. The Pharaoh himself describes hearing the cries of hungry infants and seeing the despair in the eyes of the elderly.
It's just a really bleak picture. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, Pharaoh starts having these crazy dreams.
These really vivid, disturbing dreams.
Not just one dream, but 2. And they both have the same basic message.
The same ominous message. Yeah.
In the first dream, he sees these 7 healthy cows, you know, like fat and happy cows.
Right, the picture of health.
And they get devoured by these like 7 scrawny, sickly cows.
It's such a disturbing image.
Right. And then in the second dream, he sees these 7 healthy ears of grain, like full and ripe.
Beautiful golden grain.
And then, boom, they get swallowed up by 7 withered, like totally dried up ears of grain.
Yeah. Like something out of a nightmare.
So you can imagine Pharaoh's like, what in the world is going on?
It's terrified.
Because in ancient cultures, like especially in Egypt, dreams were super important.
Especially the dreams of a ruler.
They were seen as messages from the gods.
Yeah, like divine communication.
So Pharaoh freaks out. He calls in all his magicians,
All the wise men.
the guys who are supposed to like interpret dreams and stuff.
Right. The experts.
And none of them can figure it out.
It's a complete mystery to them.
It's like the dream was designed to stump them.
Yeah. Like a divine riddle.
And that's when our boy Joseph enters the picture.
He's in prison, remember?
Right, he's still in prison for, you know, what Potiphar's wife accused him of.
Right. But he's already made a name for himself as a dream interpreter.
Exactly. Remember that whole thing with the cupbearer and the baker?
Yeah.
So word gets back to Pharaoh about this guy Joseph, who can, like, explain dreams. And Pharaoh's like, bring him to me.
He's desperate for answers.
Totally. But before Joseph even meets Pharaoh, there's this interesting little detail.
What's that?
The Bible says that Joseph had to shave and change his clothes.
Oh, yeah. I always found that interesting. What do you think that was about?
Well, Egyptian priests had to be ritually pure to enter temples,
Right.
and that included being clean-shaven. So maybe Joseph, intentionally or not, was aligning himself with that priestly role, you know, like setting himself apart from Pharaoh's magicians.
That's a fascinating insight. Like he's subtly saying, I'm not like those other guys. My wisdom comes from a different source.
Exactly.
Okay, so Joseph stands before Pharaoh
All cleaned up and ready to go.
and he lays it all out.
The interpretation, that is.
Huh.
7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine.
A direct message from God.
And Joseph doesn't just stop there. He's like, okay, Pharaoh, here's what you got to do.
Yeah, he lays out a plan.
Appoint a leader, stockpile grain during the good years, and, you know, prepare for the famine.
Smart.
So Pharaoh's like, whoa, this guy's amazing.
He sees the Spirit of God in Joseph.
And decides to appoint him as, like, his right-hand man,
Vizier, basically.
the prime minister of Egypt.
Talk about a glow up.
Right. Like, from prisoner to VIP in a matter of hours.
It reminds me of how God changed the names of other biblical figures.
Oh, yeah, like Abram to Abraham.
Jacob to Israel.
Simon to Peter.
It's like a sign of a new identity, a new destiny.
And Pharaoh even gives Joseph a new Egyptian name.
Right, and dresses him in these fancy robes, gives him a gold chain, a signet ring.
And even offers him the daughter of a high priest to be his wife.
It's like a complete transformation.
And what's really cool is that you can see how all of Joseph's earlier experiences, even the bad ones, like being sold into slavery,
And being falsely accused.
right, all of those things actually prepared him for this massive responsibility.
God was working behind the scenes all along,
Yeah.
you know?
It's a powerful reminder that our experiences, even the ones that seem totally pointless or even painful,
They might actually be shaping us.
for something bigger down the line.
Exactly. It's like we're all in training for something.
So now let's fast forward a few years. The famine has hit Canaan hard,
Hard.
and Jacob sends his 10 sons down to Egypt to buy grain.
To buy food, they're desperate.
And remember those dreams Joseph had way back when about his brothers bowing down to him?
Oh, yeah.
Well, guess what?
This is where it gets really interesting.
The brothers arrive in Egypt, and they unknowingly bow down to Joseph.
The dream is starting to come true.
But do they recognize him?
Nope. Not a clue.
Joseph decides to play a little game with them. He accuses them of being spies
Spies.
and demands that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt as proof that they're telling the truth.
It's a test.
He wants to see if they've changed at all since they sold him into slavery.
And remember, Benjamin is a key part of those dreams.
Right. All the brothers have to bow down.
For the dream to be completely fulfilled.
So the brothers are totally freaked out.
Terrified.
They end up getting thrown in prison for 3 days.
3 days. That's interesting. We see that 3 days motif a lot in the Bible.
It's true.
Often connected to suffering, redemption, even resurrection.
It's definitely something to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Anyway, Joseph eventually releases the brothers,
But he keeps one of them, Simeon, as a hostage.
and he sends them back to Canaan with grain.
But get this.
He secretly returns their money, too.
Yeah, he's playing with them. It's like he's giving them a chance to come clean, to make things right,
So they head back to Canaan, with Simeon still in Egypt.
and a whole lot of questions.
And their dad, Jacob, is understandably hesitant to let Benjamin go. I mean, he's already lost one son.
He doesn't want to risk losing another.
But Judah, who has really stepped up as a leader at this point,
Yeah, he's really grown.
he offers himself as a guarantee for Benjamin's safety.
He's like, I'll take his place if anything happens to him.
And he convinces Jacob to let them go back to Egypt.
So the stage is set for a dramatic reunion.
A reunion they don't even know is coming.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
So the brothers are heading back to Egypt, right?
Yeah,
This time with Benjamin.
with Benjamin.
They're bringing all these gifts and stuff.
Yeah, trying to, appease this vizier.
This mysterious vizier who seems to hold all the power.
Right, exactly.
And they get to Joseph's house. And they're invited in for a feast.
Like a big fancy feast.
A big fancy feast. But, there's this underlying tension.
Oh, yeah, you can just feel it.
Like, what's going to happen?
Like something's going to go down.
And Joseph, he immediately asks about their father.
Hmm.
Like, he's really concerned about Jacob.
Shows that he still cares,
Even after all these years.
Deep down, he's still that same brother.
But then, things get kind of weird.
Yeah.
Joseph, he tells his servants to secretly put a silver cup
A silver cup.
into Benjamin's sack.
The same cup that he uses for divination.
Right, like his special cup.
Yeah.
It's like he's setting them up.
Yeah. What do you think that's about?
I don't know, it's almost like he's testing them,
Like pushing them to see how they'll react.
to see if they've really changed.
Remember, last time their money was mysteriously returned.
Exactly. And now it's the silver cup.
It's like, what's he up to?
So anyway, the brothers leave. They're on their way back to Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph sends his steward after them,
Uh-oh.
accusing them of stealing the cup.
Well, of course.
And the brothers, they're like, no way, we didn't take anything.
They're adamant about it.
They're even like, if you find the cup, we'll become your slaves.
They're bad, sure.
So they search all the sacks.
The tension is just building.
And guess what?
They find it in Benjamin's sack.
In Benjamin's sack, of course.
Oh, man.
So they're all brought back to Joseph.
And Judah, who had vowed to protect Benjamin.
Right, Judah's like their leader now.
He steps forward.
And he pleads with Joseph.
Yeah, he gives this whole heartfelt speech.
He's like, take me as a slave instead. Our father, he's already lost one son. He can't bear to lose another.
He's basically revealing their deepest secret.
To the very person they wronged.
Without even knowing it.
It's just like, whoa.
Mind-blowing.
And Joseph, he can't take it anymore.
He's overwhelmed with emotion.
He's like, get everyone out of here except for my brothers.
It's time for the truth to come out.
And he finally reveals himself.
Can you imagine that moment?
I bet they were just stunned.
Years of wondering what happened to him.
And there he is.
The most powerful man in Egypt.
It's crazy.
And Joseph, he just starts weeping.
He's so overcome with emotion.
Years of pain and longing.
All coming out.
And he tells his brothers, don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves.
He's like, this was all part of God's plan.
To save lives during the famine.
It's incredible.
I can see the bigger picture.
Even though they betrayed him, he knows that God was working through it all.
And he even comforts them.
Yeah, he's like, it's okay. I forgive you.
Which is huge, considering what they did to him.
And then he's like, go back to Canaan and bring Dad and everyone here.
He wants to take care of them.
He wants to be a family again.
And Pharaoh's totally cool with it.
He even provides wagons and supplies for the journey.
It's like a national celebration.
It's amazing how Joseph's faithfulness,
His obedience to God,
not only saved his family,
but benefited an entire nation.
it's like a ripple effect.
Our actions can have far-reaching consequences.
Even when we don't realize it.
Absolutely.
So the brothers, they go back to Canaan.
And they tell Jacob the news.
Joseph is alive.
And he's the vizier of Egypt.
Can you imagine Jacob's reaction?
He must have been like, what?
After all those years of mourning.
Thinking his son was dead.
And then, boom, he's alive and thriving.
It's too good to be true.
But then they show him the wagons.
The gifts from Pharaoh.
And Jacob, he's like, okay, maybe this is real.
His spirit is revived.
He finally allows himself to hope.
To believe.
So they set off for Egypt.
The whole family.
And when Jacob finally sees Joseph,
Face to face.
So
pure joy.
tears. It's a beautiful moment.
It really shows the power of family, you know.
How love can overcome anything.
And Joseph, he embraces his father.
Weeping openly.
He's like, Dad, everything that happened, it was all God's doing.
I mean, the separation.
It all served a purpose.
And so Jacob and his whole family, they settle in Egypt.
Protected and provided for by Joseph.
The son they once betrayed.
It's really a beautiful ending to this chapter of the story.
But there's still so much to explore.
What happens next for Joseph and his family?
In this foreign land,
What challenges will they face?
how will their presence impact Egypt?
It really makes you think, like, what did the Egyptians think about all these foreigners coming in?
Especially during a famine, right?
Exactly. Everyone's struggling to survive, and then here comes this huge family.
Well, the study guide actually mentioned something interesting about that.
Oh, yeah. Apparently the Hyksos, who were ruling Lower Egypt at the time, were themselves foreigners.
Interesting.
So they might have been more open to welcoming Jacob and his family.
Makes sense. Like they wouldn't have seen it as such a big deal.
Right.
And speaking of historical context, the guide also talks about this tomb inscription
Oh, yeah.
from an Egyptian official in Upper Egypt.
Uh-huh.
And it describes a 7-year famine during that era.
Wow.
And how this official like stockpiled grain to help the people.
It's like a real-life parallel to Joseph's story.
Right. It shows that famines were a real threat back then.
And that they could last for years.
So while Joseph's story might seem like extraordinary.
It's definitely rooted in the historical realities of the time.
Exactly. These biblical stories weren't just happening in a vacuum.
They were interwoven with the social and political and environmental events of the ancient world.
Well, this has been an awesome deep dive.
It really has.
We've seen Joseph's incredible rise to power.
From slave to vizier.
His emotional reunion with his brothers.
After all those years.
And the ultimate fulfillment of God's plan to save his family.
It's a story of forgiveness,
leadership,
and God's providence.
But before we wrap up,
we want to leave you with a question.
A question to ponder.
If you were in Joseph's shoes,
how would you have reacted to everything that happened?
Could you have forgiven your brothers?
Could you have trusted God through it all?
Even when things seem to be falling apart?
It's a tough question.
But it's worth asking ourselves.
Because it can teach us a lot about our own character.
About how we deal with guilt and forgiveness.
And about how we view God's role in our lives.
So we encourage you.
Reflect on Joseph's story.
And think about how it might connect with your own experiences.
Think about the ways God might be working through your current circumstances.
Even the tough ones.
To shape you and prepare you for something greater.
And with that,
we'll wrap up this deep dive into the Joseph story.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll be back soon to explore another fascinating topic.
Until then, keep diving deep